October 9th, 1972, 9:41 p.m. Harlem. An old accountant stepped off the curb with a leather briefcase and vanished in under 6 seconds. No screams, no chasse, just a white panel van swallowing the only man who knew every offshore route Frank Lucas ever used. The street kept moving, but the numbers inside that man's head could have bought a city, and someone had decided they wanted the keys. 9 hours, 41 minutes, and 12 seconds. The van rolled up like it belonged there. White panel, no windows, no company name, no reason to notice it. That's why it worked. The side door slid open. Two men stepped out wearing cheap ski masks that made their breathing sound loud. One held a strip of duct tape already peeled and ready. The other reached for Arthur's briefcase with a casual certainty, like he'd been practicing the motion in his head all day. Arthur saw the wrist first. Not the mask, not the van, the wrist. A tattoo flashed when the sleeve rode up, black rose petals wrapped around thorns, inked so dark it looked wet. Arthur tried to turn. His knees didn't cooperate fast enough. A hand grabbed the back of his coat. Another hand took the briefcase. Duct tape sealed his mouth before air could become sound. Arthur's shoes scraped the pavement once, then his feet left the ground. 9 hours, 41 minutes, and 18 seconds. He was inside the van. The door shut with a soft click that sounded like a file closing. The van rolled forward, not fast, not reckless. It merged into traffic like it belonged in the city's bloodstream. A woman pushing a stroller stared at a bus schedule. The cigarette seller looked up and looked away. A man in a pork pie hat stepped aside without thinking. Nobody wanted to be the person who saw. One kid saw anyway. Reggie, 16, leaning against the bodega wall, watched the brake lights blink twice and felt his stomach drop for reasons he couldn't explain. He didn't know Arthur personally. He just knew what it looked like when a neighborhood got robbed of something quiet and important. Reggie didn't call the police. Police didn't return people. Police returned paperwork. He ran to a payphone, hands shaking, and dialed a number he'd memorized by fear. It rang once, twice. A voice answered on the second ring. Calm, controlled, like the man had been awake for this call his whole life. Yeah. Reggie swallowed hard. Mr. Lucas, they took Art. Silence. Not shock. Not confusion. Silence with weight. Where? Lennox and 116th. White panel van. One of them had a black rose tattoo. The voice didn't change. Go home. Lock your door. Don't tell anybody you called me. The line went dead. Frank Lucas stood in a back room behind a barber shop on 125th, the kind of place where clippers buzzed all day and nobody asked questions at night. He wore a clean suit with no flash. No utility. No swagger. He looked like a man who could sit in a boardroom without raising suspicion, which is why he could do what he did. His brother Teddy watched him, waiting for the explosion. It didn't come. Frank set the phone down slowly. His face didn't move. Only his eyes cooled, like somebody turned off the heat. Arthur, Frank said, not to Teddy, not to the room, like he was saying it to the air itself. Teddy's jaw tightened. We go now. Frank looked at him like you look at a man waving a lit match over gasoline. We go smart. He's old, Teddy snapped. They don't keep old men long. Frank's voice stayed flat. That's why we don't waste time being loud. He dialed a number. A man answered immediately, voice sharp and awake. Find a van, Frank said. Not the rumor. The van. I want the plate, the garage, the hands on the wheel. 1 hour. The man on the other end hesitated. That's 1 hour, Frank repeated, softer this time. That softness was the threat. Click. Teddy paced, fists opening and closing like he was trying to crush the air. Who's Black Rose? Frank didn't pace. He never paced. New blood, he said. They think fear is a language. They think numbers are God. 10:11 p.m. A knock at the back door. A delivery kid stood there with trembling hands and no food. Just a plain brown envelope with Frank written on it in block letters. A man gave me $10, the kid said. Told me don't look inside. Frank took the envelope. Teddy reached for it. but Frank didn't let him. Frank opened it himself. Inside was Arthur's gold watch. The hand was stopped at 9:41, and beneath it, a single black rose petal dried and pressed flat like a signature. Teddy made a sound in his throat. Frank didn't. Frank closed his fist around the watch like he was holding something fragile and furious. "That's a message," Teddy said. Frank nodded once. "They want me to know they got him." "They want ransom," Teddy said. Frank's eyes lifted, calm as a church. "No, they want leverage." 11:03 p.m. A secure line rang. One Frank didn't give to anyone who liked attention. Frank picked up and didn't speak first. Silence was his first weapon. A voice on the other end smiled through the words. "Mr. Lucas." Frank waited. "My name's Marcus," the voice continued. "Your accountant is uncomfortable." Frank's tone stayed flat. "Where is he?" Marcus chuckled. "We don't want drama. We want codes. Offshore accounts. Safe boxes. Numbers." Frank's reply was immediate. "Arthur doesn't give codes over the phone." Marcus laughed softly. "Don't insult me. We know what he is. We know what he does." Frank's eyes didn't blink. "If you knew, you'd know he doesn't give you anything. Not like that." A pause. Marcus hadn't expected resistance to sound so calm. "You got till morning," Marcus said. "After that, he starts losing things." Frank's voice hardened by 1 degree. "You do what you do. I'll do what I do." Marcus tried to push like ego needed the last word. "You think you're the devil in Harlem." Frank's answer came quiet and clean. "You called me. That means you think I'm something." Click. 12:06 a.m. Another envelope arrived. A Polaroid inside. Arthur seated on a chair. Alive, eyes open, tape across his mouth. No gore. No spectacle. Just the horror of a man trapped inside his own body. At the bottom, thick marker, codes or casket. Teddy slammed his fist into the wall. Plastered dust fell like snow. Frank stared at the photo, then did something that felt impossible for him. He sat down. He pulled a small notebook from his inner pocket and wrote a single line like a ledger entry. "Arthur will not break." Teddy saw it. "How you know?" Frank didn't look up. "Because he's the only man who ever stayed when he had every reason to leave." In a basement that smelled like damp concrete and old cigarettes. Arthur listened to footsteps move around him. He couldn't see much under the hood they'd pulled over his head, but he could hear the details: boots, a radiator clicking, a fan turning, and a radio tuned low to a gospel station. Bright voices singing about mercy in a room built for none. A chair scraped close. Marcus' voice leaned and smooth, almost friendly, like this was a business meeting. "Arthur, you know why you're here." They peeled the tape back just enough for him to breathe words. Arthur's voice came out rough but steady. "You don't know Frank." Marcus chuckled. "Everybody knows Frank." Arthur shook his head under the hood. "They know the rumor, not the man." Marcus' tone sharpened. "Codes." Arthur swallowed, then spoke like a man who'd already accepted the cost. "Money is paper. You think you're stealing paper." Marcus laughed, too loud, too forced. "Old man, paper runs the world." Arthur's reply was a whisper that sounded like a curse. "Not his world." Marcus leaned closer, voice turning colder. "Give me what I want, and you don't suffer long." Arthur's breathing stayed slow. "You don't get it. He'll come. Not for the money. For the souls." Silence stretched. The gospel radio kept singing like it didn't know what it was blessing. Marcus exhaled, annoyed, then pressed the tape back on Arthur's mouth like punctuation. "We'll see." At 9:07 a.m., Frank Lucas walked into the city morgue like gravity. Fluorescent lights made everyone look sick. A clerk behind glass started to speak, saw Frank's eyes, and decided silence was safer. A metal drawer slid open with a sound like a sigh. Arthur lay inside, coat still on him, like somebody tried to return him the way they found him. There were marks you didn't linger on, signs you didn't describe. The important part was what wasn't there. Fear wasn't there. Frank stared for a long time, then placed Arthur's stopped watch on Arthur's chest, right over the heart that had refused to cooperate. You did good, Frank whispered, barely audible. Teddy's voice cracked. They wanted codes. Frank turned slowly, face still calm. That calm was the worst part. They wanted digits. Frank said, "We'll give them digits. 10 million. 7 days. One final." Teddy blinked. "We paying them." Frank's eyes didn't move. "No." That afternoon, in a quiet apartment on Riverside Drive, Frank gathered men who didn't fidget. No music, no women, no yokes, just a table, a clock, and the feeling that a line had been crossed. Frank stood by the window and watched the Hudson like it owed him something. "Black Rose thinks they can touch my blood and keep their hands," he said. "They're wrong." A man named Leon cleared his throat. "We can hit him tonight." Frank didn't look at him. "You hit them tonight, you hit ghosts. They scatter. They learn. They come back meaner." Teddy leaned forward. "Then what?" Frank turned from the window. "We teach them to sit." He pointed at a mid-level soldier in the corner, Eddie Knox. Hungry eyes, weak spine, the kind of man who wanted promotion more than he wanted peace. Eddie blinked. "Me?" Frank nodded. "You're going to be bought." Eddie's mouth opened, then closed. "Frank, you're going to let them think you're scared," Frank continued. "You're going to let them think you're tired of being a soldier. You're going to give them something sweet enough to make them stupid." He slid a folded map across the table. "Hand-drawn, rough, real enough to kill for. An old grain warehouse in Newark," Frank said. "You tell Marcus I keep black cash there. 10 million in sacks. I move it in 7 days." Teddy frowned. "That warehouse is empty." Frank's face didn't change. "Exactly. 7 days is a long time when you're waiting on grief to settle." Frank used those days the way he used money, as a tool. Day 1, he changed phones, cut lines, moved men who'd been loyal for 10 years without explanation, just to watch who complained. Day 2, a rumor drifted into the street like cigarette smoke. Frank had off-book cash sitting in Jersey, uncounted by banks, unseen by law. 10 million stacked like grain sacks in a place nobody cared about. Day 3, Black Rose started circling. A bartender in Queens saw a man with a Black Rose tattoo paying with crisp bills. A junkie on 8th Avenue swore he saw a white panel van behind a church. A cop in the 28th precinct mentioned casually that somebody was about to get rich. Information spread because people loved feeling close to danger when it wasn't theirs. Day 4, Eddie Knox vanished for 12 hours, then returned pale, shirt smelling like sweat and cheap cologne. "They approached me," Eddie said, voice trembling just enough to sound true. "A guy in black leather. Said they knew I worked for you." Frank's eyes stayed steady. "What did you tell him?" Eddie swallowed. "I told him I'm tired of being a soldier." Teddy's stare turned sharp. "You tell them anything else?" "Not yet," Eddie said too fast. Frank leaned in slightly. "You will, when I tell you." Eddie's throat bobbed. Frank cut him off with a calm that didn't need volume. "You want to live, you do what I say. You want to die, you improvise." By day 6, Marcus sent scouts to Newark. 11:53 p.m. 2 men in a brown Ford Econoline rolled past the warehouse slow. They saw what Frank wanted them to see. Frank's security, the country boys, moving heavy-looking crates near a loading bay, flashlights slicing through darkness, voices barking orders. It looked like business. It looked like weight. It looked like nerves. One scout grinned. "That's it." The other licked his lips. "Tomorrow we kings." They drove back to Marcus with excitement that tasted like victory. Marcus listened in a basement office behind a shuttered storefront in the Bronx. A Black Rose sat in a glass of water on his desk because he liked the idea of being remembered. "How many guards?" Marcus asked. 4, the scouts said. "Maybe 6. Marcus smiled. "So he's nervous." He stood and addressed his crew. 20 men, mostly young, eyes hungry, hands restless. He spoke like a preacher who'd turned sin into a business plan. "Frank Lucas thinks he's a myth," Marcus said. "Tomorrow we prove he's flesh." Some men laughed. Some nodded. One man in the back crossed himself without realizing it. 2:13 a.m., the seventh night. Newark's industrial zone felt like the end of the world. Warehouses squatted like sleeping animals. Streetlights flickered. The air smelled like oil and river water. A convoy rolled in, 3 vehicles. Headlights off until the last moment. They stopped outside the grain warehouse like wolves arriving at a fence. Marcus stepped out first. Black jacket, gloves, tattoo visible on purpose. He wanted the night to recognize him. He nodded once. Go. 20 men moved fast, organized, practiced. Doors kicked. Flashlights swept. Guns aimed at shadows. They poured into the warehouse, expecting resistance. None came. No guards. No krats. No money. No country boys. Just emptiness that felt staged. A nervous laugh escaped someone's mouth and died. Marcus' jaw tightened. He didn't like being confused in front of his people. Find the safe room. They moved through corridors, boots echoing, breathing loud. They found a reinforced door at the back, the kind you'd expect behind real cash. A tech guy knelt, worked the lock with shaking hands. Give me a minute. Marcus checked his watch. 2:21 a.m. 2:22, a click. The door swung open. They stepped into the vault room and stopped. In the center of the room sat a single metal chair. On the chair lay one object, a bank check pinned down by a brass paperweight shaped like a lion. Marcus walked to it slowly, picked it up, and read out loud, because pride needs an audience. Pay to the order of Black Rose Funeral Home. His men chuckled, confused. Then Marcus read the amount line. Your worthless lives. For half a second, the room was silent enough to hear the building settle. Then the vault door behind them slammed shut on its own. Metal on metal. Final. One man lunged for the handle. Yanked. Nothing. Another man hit the keypad. The screen flashed dead. No power. A third man slammed his shoulder into the door. The door didn't care. Panic rose fast because panic was honest. Marcus tried to keep his voice hard. Calm down. But his eyes betrayed him. He understood what a locked room really meant. A speaker crackled to life in the corner. An old intercom, the kind warehouses used before everything became digital and polite. Frank's voice came through calm, almost conversational. Marcus, Frank said, not loud, certain. Arthur knew codes to money, but you never asked the only code that mattered. Marcus stared at the speaker like he could punch it. You ain't here. Frank answered, steady. I'm always here. A pause, just long enough for every man in that room to imagine the next second. You wanted to be part of my capital, Frank continued. You wanted to buy your way into my name. Marcus forced a laugh that didn't convince anyone. You think you're God? Frank's reply landed like a nail. No, God forgives. The intercom hissed softly like it was smiling. I don't. The lights in the vault flickered once. Not a warning, just the building blinking. A sharp, unfamiliar smell touched the air, chemical, biting wrong. Some of the men coughed. One wiped his eyes and swore. What is that? Someone shouted. Marcus barked. Shut up. But control wasn't a volume. Control was a door that opened. And this one didn't. Frank's voice returned, quieter now, almost intimate. You wanted to turn Arthur into a calculator. You wanted to make him a machine that prints numbers. Marcus spat at the floor. We wanted what's ours. Frank's answer was immediate. Nothing you touch is yours. The intercom clicked off. The room held its breath. Then the world outside the vault changed in a way the men couldn't argue with. A low roar, distant at first, then rushing closer, as if the building itself had decided to erase what was inside it. A sudden flash turned the vault walls bright. A concussion slammed the air. Outside, the warehouse lit the Newark sky like a violent sunrise, then folded into thick black smoke that climbed fast and didn't look back. A mile away, Frank Lucas stood beside a black Lincoln Continental on a dark service road. He watched the horizon with the patience of a man waiting for a train. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was finishing something. Teddy stood behind him, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the smoke. That's all of them. Frank's voice was flat. Enough. Teddy swallowed. They never got the codes. Frank exhaled slowly. Arthur took them with him. The next morning, newspapers called it an accident. Electrical. Gas leak. Unknown cause. They printed numbers, damage estimates, response times, city statements that meant nothing. The street told a simpler story. Black Rose went in. Black Rose never came out. Arthur's funeral was quiet. Closed casket. No speeches. A few men who didn't cry because they didn't know how. Harlem kept moving because Harlem always moved. Frank stood by the grave after everyone left, alone with fresh dirt and cold wind. Teddy approached carefully like grief was something that might explode. "We did what we had to," Teddy said. Frank didn't look at him. "No," he replied. "We did what we chose." Teddy's voice dropped. "What's the difference?" Frank's eyes stayed dead calm. "Choice is a signature." That night, Frank sat back in the barbershop room where the first call came in. He didn't drink. He didn't sleep. He listened. Men came and went with scraps of information like offerings. Who had seen Eddie Knox meeting someone in a parked car? Which cop had asked questions about Arthur's office hours? Who'd been spending crisp bills in the wrong neighborhoods? Who'd been too quiet when Arthur's name came up? Frank didn't rage. Rage was messy. Frank wrote names on paper like accounting. At 2:17 a.m., Eddie Knox walked into the room, eyes wide, trying to look innocent and failing. Frank didn't accuse him. He didn't raise his voice. He slid a photograph across the table, blurry, taken from a distance. Eddie leaning toward a wrist with a black rose tattoo. Eddie's face drained. "Frank." Frank's voice stayed low. "Tell me why." Eddie's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't know they'd kill him. I thought they just wanted money." Frank leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just present. "You thought you'd sell a man and buy your way up." Eddie's eyes flooded. "Please, I swear I didn't." Frank shook his head once. "Arthur used to tell me something. When you balance books, you don't erase theft by pretending it isn't there. You write it down. You make it real. Then you pay the cost." Teddy tensed, expecting the obvious ending. Frank lifted a hand, stopping him. "No noise," Frank said. "No bodies for the papers." Teddy frowned. "Then what?" Frank looked at Eddie like he was already gone. "We erase him." Eddie was taken out alive. Not beaten in that room. Not turned into a spectacle. Frank didn't need spectacle. Over the next weeks, Eddie's name stopped working. His landlord wouldn't take rent. Bars refused service. Cabs drove past like he wasn't there. Friends avoided him like a curse. Every door shut at once. Every job lead dried up. His phone calls didn't get returned. He didn't die loudly. He died invisible. And that became the colder legend. The one people didn't like repeating because it sounded too real. Frank Lucas didn't just punish bodies. He punished existence. Years later, old heads in Harlem still talked about Arthur Bell. Not because Arthur was a gangster, but because he was something rarer in that world. Loyal without being owned. They'd say, "Arthur took the codes to the grave." And they'd add, quieter, like a warning, "Black Rose asked for numbers." They never asked for the other thing. How much a calm man can take before his calm becomes a sentence. Because when someone steals your friend at 9:41 p.m. and hand you back a watch stopped on the second the world changed, you stop believing in second chances. You start counting differently. Not dollars. Not bodies. Days. 7 days. One final. And after that, just smoke on the horizon and a city that learned a simple rule it never wrote down. You can steal money from a king and live. But if you steal the one person who remembers the king before the crown, you don't get chased. You get erased.